Don't let the title of this video fool you. There will not be any political comments or discussion in this video. I just thought, hey, that's appropriate. Hi BookTube, it's Kim at middle of the book march. Julie, I have another new pair of glasses, if you're watching. Today is a tag. I have rejected the whole Tag Tuesday schedule, and I do what I want. That's the way it's gonna go. Today I have the presidential book tag, and this was a tag that was originated by my friend and yours, Steve Donahue, and I was tagged by Heidi at My Reading Life. I love Heidi's channel, and I'm sure you're all watching her too, but if you're not, you need to go over and subscribe to her channel immediately. My Reading Life is the name. So there are 10 prompts, and they all have to do with some sort of American president. So let's get going. Number 1, George Washington. What's the first book you remember reading all by yourself with no help from anybody? I racked my brain and I don't know. I have no idea what was the very first book. It was probably something by Dr. Suess. I was a reader from birth. My mother read to me, and she used to demand and stress that I was reading at like 3. I don't know about that. But I was reading from a very early age and never stopped. The books that I think got me excited about reading as a child was the Trixie Belden Mysteries, and that means I'm old, and I've said this before, they're kind of like the discount Nancy Drew. And until I got to middle school and started discovering all of the Judy Blume books that, you know, some of our parents tried to stop us from reading, you know, like Deanie or Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, all those books. The Trixie Belden Mysteries were my book of choice, and so I chewed through those one after another. And those are what got me excited to read books on my own and pick them out for myself. So it was a lot of fun. Number 2, John Adams. I'm looking down at my laptop. What book comes to mind that's short but disproportionately powerful? I have 2, and I've talked about both of these. So the first one is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. My particular copy is the novella all by itself by this Penguin edition. This is an extremely powerful story about, we all know Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and it's become a cliche when we describe somebody who we think has that type of personality. You know, they're sweet one minute and awful and angry the next minute. And sometimes that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personality becomes that cliche. The story is a short but extremely powerful exploration between good and evil. There's no good or bad person. People have temperaments and personalities on a spectrum. And it also discusses that we all have the potential for evil that exists inside of us. This particular story was, evil is exacerbated by a potion, and it turns this intelligent, determined doctor into a monster. So extremely short, very powerful. The other one is Deborah Levy's The Cost of Living, and this one shocked me, took me by surprise at how much I loved it. She discusses the cost of living for women as wives, as mothers, reeling after a divorce, being a writer and trying to get her feet planted, having to move, having 2 daughters, how she paid for living her life, what she sacrificed and what it meant to her. Extremely well written, extremely powerful for me. And I think I said in my wrap up that I identified with a little too much of it. So number 3, Thomas Jefferson. Tell us about a book you like that's written by a very bad person. The Road by Cormac McCarthy. He sucks as a person. He's just cantankerous and arrogant. He rode on the coattails of his wife at the time until he got successful enough to dump her. He abandoned his kids. He rejected his kids. Just an awful human being. And his books can be violent and disgusting and gory, but I really did like this one. This also is gory and gross and scary and evil, and but again has a lot to say about a dystopian world and what would happen to the country if everything was destroyed by a nuclear blast or nuclear conflict or war, however you want to describe it. One man and his young son, after his wife just decides she can't deal with that, so does she take off or does she kill herself? I don't remember. I think she kills herself. But they're left to deal with the pieces by themselves and are on the run because this becomes an evil fallen society where it's everybody for themselves, and people around them become cannibalistic, and it's pretty nasty and gross, but so much commentary on humanity or the lack thereof. But Cormac McCarthy does suck as a person. Yeah. Number 4, Theodore Roosevelt. Name a book that has more energy than you do. I had to think about this. It's like, how am I supposed to interpret that? That's an interesting question. And I had a hard time with it. But finally I picked this one. This is another novella. And this is A Door by Doris Lessing. This is also known as The Grandmothers. And there's a movie. You can see those are movie stars. And so I hate the movie covers, but oh well. This is a very strange story of two families who celebrate together. The wives are best friends. The husbands kind of jump in the fun and come along for the ride. They have children. Like I said, they've grown up together. The plot is the moms start having an affair with the other friend's sons. It's bizarre. Really strange concept. Really interesting dynamics. This little tiny novella has way more energy than I ever will. And it's like, who's hopping into whose bed next? And I gotta start keeping track of whose son is whose because this is getting gross. But it was a really interesting story. Had a lot to say, and you know, what's appropriate, what isn't, what's socially acceptable, what isn't. We think we have those lines and those boundaries defined, but this book brought up a lot of questions, so super interesting stuff. Let's see, number 5, Franklin Roosevelt. Is there a book that fundamentally changed your conception of reading? I have 2. This is going to be boring because I've talked about these before. This one is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, and this is the book that I read in middle school. I think I was in 7th grade. And it's a fantasy novel of hobbits. And this was the first book that I ever read where I felt like it was a gateway to adulthood. And it completely sparked my love of fantasy novels. But this was it for me. This was the one where, you know, that it's not inappropriate for young kids or middle schoolers, but for whatever reason, it felt to me like I want to go out and seek out more books like this. And I think after I read this, I started reading T.S. White or I don't know what I read, but may not have been very politically correct or appropriate, but I read it. And then the other one is John Irving, The World According to Garp. This was the very first book that I bought with my own money as a young adult. I was probably 18 or 19. And I didn't even know who John Irving was. The store that I bought it was probably 15 minutes from his childhood or young adult home. And I used to drive by that house constantly because after reading this book, I read most of his other books that were out at the time and became a huge fangirl. But yeah, that was the first one. I handed over my own cash and convinced myself I'm an adult now. So stupid. Number 6, John Kennedy. What's the most glamorous it book you've ever read? And I don't have a physical copy anymore because I gave it away, but it was An American Marriage by T.R.E. Jones. And it's a pretty book. It's got a turquoise blue cover and a little gold foil on this tree. And this book was everywhere. Everybody was reading it. the president, Barack Obama, at the time recommended it. I think it may have been an Oprah book. I don't remember. I didn't like it. And it's a pretty book. The concept was really interesting. I just didn't like how the story was put together. And it was interesting because it was written in chunks of, I think, 7 years, or it was written in chunks of time with very large gaps in between. And that just didn't work for me. And the story wasn't compelling enough. And in those gaps were pieces of information that I assumed may have been really helpful to have said out loud, or to have written out loud, to understand and make that story cohesive for me. So I wasn't a fan of that. Number 7, Gerald Ford. Have you ever read a placeholder book? Something that only served to get you from one book to another. Yes, and I wasn't sorry, because I just loved it. This is The Wedding Date by Jasmine Guillory. And this is my copy, but I initially checked it out of the library. And I don't remember. It may have been during like a Valentine's Day event. I think it was a couple of years ago. And it was on the display table, and I thought, oh, I like that cover. It's my favorite color. And I thought, oh, that looks good. And I read the back, and it's like, oh, that sounds cute. It was a romance. I wanted to read something lighter and fun. I liked the concept. I had a pile of other books at the time that were all pretty heavy duty, literary. I think I may have had some nonfiction in there. So I picked it up, and then I was getting deeper and deeper in the hole of heavy reading, depressing, dark, gloomy. And I'm like, I got to read something different. So I picked it up and started reading and got sucked in and read it in a day and a half. So I really enjoyed it. And I have since acquired her next book after this, I believe, is The Proposal. I found it at Goodwill for like $4. So I have that one in the wings in a very long list of books that I want to read. Let's see, number 8, Bill Clinton. A reading experience you loved despite how utterly sinful it was. I have 2 of those as well. This book, The Pisces by Melissa Broder. This is basically a story of a woman who falls in love with a merman. And so many people don't like this book. So many people thought it was awful. It was gross. It is gross. It's dirty and filthy and physically gross, but hilarious. This is such a great example of satire in contemporary fiction, and Melissa Broder writing about how women feel about needing or wanting men in their lives, and what they would do to themselves, and what they would sacrifice about themselves in order to have love and in order to have a man and a relationship. And it's really darkly funny, but there is some really dirty bits and some kind of nastiness, but I kind of really enjoyed it. And the other one is The Sellout by Paul Beatty. I have never read anything like this before. He discusses so many things. I'm just going to read little pieces of the jacket. Agrarian ghetto of Dickens. It's a character on the outskirts of Los Angeles. He discusses racism, slavery, the way he was raised by his father. He only had his father at home, talking about sociology, psychological studies that his father subjected him to in childhood. I was not... as I was reading this book, I was unaware of, should I be offended or not? Should I stop reading this or not? I'm not sure if I should be reading this, but I thought it was brilliant and hilarious and nasty and brings up a whole lot of gut feelings that this is just not correct. But again, I enjoyed that one too. What does that say about me? I don't know. Number 9. George W. Bush. What's the most harmful book you ever read? Oh, good gracious. Another one that I had a hard time thinking about this, like, harmful. How is a book harmful? And then it came to me, as I have ranted about this many times, 3 Women by Lisa Taddeo. It is not a book about women's desire. It is not a functional look at romance, love, and relationships. It is not even a functional look at sex and analysis of how women feel about that. It is a piece of trash that only talks about 3 individual women. Okay, the title says it, right? However, the author makes gross, sweeping stereotypes about women and their sex lives, women and their feelings of desire, what motivates women, how women express their sexual desire. That wasn't at all what this book was. This was a portrait of 3 highly unhealthy, dysfunctional women, pandering to men, pandering to the men in their lives, sacrificing so much of themselves and their sexual decision-making and their agency. And it was just an awful example of a nonfiction book marketed towards women, talking about so-called women's desire, and it was not that at all. Don't read it. No. And then the other one was, I thought of, the character was very damaging, and it's I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara, one woman's obsessive search for the Golden State Killer. That was really good. True crime. Michelle McNamara was the wife of Patton Oswalt, the actor. She passed away before the book was finished and before the Golden State Killer was actually found and arrested and convicted, which was really too bad because she worked so hard in tracking down the clues and the facts and tracking down this serial killer. But he was extremely frightening, just evil, serial rapist and murderer. And the book went between his story, his crime, and tracking his crimes, and her process that she went through. And she was obsessed with true crime, and she listened to podcasts, and she eventually became involved with the authorities and in a group that was tracking him via the computer and the internet. Really, really fascinating. And he was a deep, dark, dangerous person. And the last prompt is number 10, Barack Obama. What's the last great book you read, flaws and all? I recently, one of my last 5-star reads is Beloved by Toni Morrison from the end of last year. I don't know if you can hear that thumping, but I think some dude outside has a car right outside my house with some music blaring. Oh, it's done. Anyway, one of my last 5-star reads, if not my last 5-star read of last year, is Beloved by Toni Morrison. It was my 3rd reading of this wonderful, beautiful, powerful book. One of the best books of all time that I've read. Exceptional. And Daniel Deronda by George Eliot. I teared up over the ending of this book. I absolutely love this book. I love the writing. I love the characters. I love the story. I love all of it. It's long. George Eliot can be long-winded, very descriptive, overly Victorian, but I don't care. 5 stars. 5 stars for me. That's it for the presidential book tag. I'm not going to tag anybody this time. If you're interested in doing this, it's fun. And kind of, naming all of these presidents at the same time that I'm reading These Truths by Jill Lepore. Really interesting stuff because I know a lot of the backstories about some of these older presidents, and I'm old enough to know a lot of the contemporary ones as well. So do it if you think it's fun. Write a comment below. Let me know what you think of these books or anything I said. Be nice, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.